A few minutes later.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. What we witnessed on that court was something genuinely worth breaking down in full detail, because this was not the kind of basketball game that simply fades from memory the following morning. This was a matchup that carried real weight, real tension, and real competitive fire from the opening tip all the way through to the final buzzer. Before this game even got underway, a substantial portion of the basketball community had already written Spain off completely. The conversations circulating online were almost dismissive, people throwing around numbers like 50-point deficits, talking about a total dismantling. A complete and utter embarrassment for the European side. And while those kinds of bold predictions generate clicks and conversation, they turned out to be nowhere near the reality of what actually happened on that floor. Spain's women's national basketball team arrived with a purpose, a plan, and the kind of collective determination that demands respect from any honest observer of the game. What made their performance even more extraordinary was the context surrounding their roster decisions heading into this contest. Spain's coaching staff made the deliberate choice to keep Maria Condi completely out of the rotation for this particular game. Now, for anyone who understands the depth of her contributions to that squad, that decision carries enormous significance. Condi is not a peripheral piece. She is a meaningful, impactful contributor who changes the dynamics of a game simply by being present on the floor. To voluntarily remove someone of that caliber from your available options and still manage to push one of the most talented national programs in the history of women's basketball to genuinely earn every single basket, that speaks volumes about the depth and character of the Spanish roster. On top of that, Spain actually cycled through a broader rotation than the United States used throughout the game. More players, fewer minutes each, and still the contest remained within reach for extended stretches. That is not something you accomplish through luck or favorable officiating. That is the product of genuine talent distributed across a well-constructed roster, operating within a disciplined system. Now, shifting the lens toward the American side of things, this was an evening that really highlighted the importance of veteran presence and quiet professionalism in high-stakes competition. Paige Bueckers and Caitlin Clark both delivered performances that were steady, composed, and ultimately effective, not necessarily the jaw-dropping, highlight reel variety of outputs that flood social media timelines, but the kind of dependable, situationally intelligent basketball that winning programs are actually built upon. Championship-level competition demands that kind of consistency. There will always be games where the spectacular moments are sparse, where the rhythm feels disrupted, where the opposition takes away your preferred options and forces you to grind through uncomfortable territory. The players and teams that succeed at the highest levels are precisely the ones who can navigate those stretches without unraveling. Both Bueckers and Clark demonstrated that composure throughout this game, and that should not be overlooked simply because the box score didn't overflow with gaudy numbers. Caitlin Clark's individual evening deserves its own dedicated conversation, because what she produced statistically was genuinely fascinating when you look beneath the surface level. From a pure shooting standpoint, this was arguably her most difficult night of the entire tournament. The ball simply was not finding the bottom of the net with the kind of regularity observers have grown accustomed to seeing from her, and that happens. It happens to every scorer operating at every level of competition, from grassroots leagues all the way up to the most prestigious international stages. Even the most gifted, most reliable offensive talents on the planet encounter stretches where the geometry of the shot just does not cooperate, where the rhythm feels slightly off, where the basket seems to shrink before your eyes. It is an unavoidable reality of basketball. What separates the truly elite from the merely talented is what they contribute on those nights when their primary weapon is temporarily misfiring. And on this particular evening, Clark answered that question emphatically on the defensive end of the floor. This was, by most reasonable assessments, the most engaged and impactful defensive showing she has delivered across the entirety of this tournament. She was in constant motion, anticipating passing lanes, contesting ball handlers, and communicating with her teammates in a way that reflected genuine investment in that side of the court. The intensity was unmistakable. You could feel it through the screen. Beyond her defensive contributions, her ability to facilitate the offense remained a constant strength throughout the game. Spain made the smart tactical decision to complicate her preferred scoring avenues, forcing her to seek out alternative methods of generating advantages for her team. Rather than forcing situations that were not available, Clark demonstrated the floor vision and decision-making sophistication to redirect the offense through different channels. That adaptability is the hallmark of a legitimate floor general, rather than simply a volume scorer wearing a point guard jersey. Moving to another American contributor who deserves genuine recognition, DeWanna Bonner brought exactly what she always brings to the table: relentless energy, tireless movement, and a consistent willingness to handle the responsibilities that rarely generate applause, but consistently generate winning basketball. Transition opportunities converted, contact finished through at the rim. Contested rebounds secured in traffic. These are the contributions that coaching staffs value enormously even when broadcast commentary glosses over them. Bonner represents that category of professional who understands her role with complete clarity and executes it with zero ambiguity night after night. The glamour may belong to others, but the winning frequently belongs to players like her. However, if this game had a pair of true catalysts, the players who genuinely elevated the American performance into a different stratosphere, those players were unquestionably Kelsey Plum and Kahleah Copper. What these two produced during this matchup was something beyond simply effective. It was electrifying. When both of them found their offensive rhythm simultaneously, the entire competitive texture of the game shifted in a way that felt almost unfair to the opposition. There was a visible confidence, a sharpness, an aggression in how they attacked the defense that communicated something important. These are players who are not content simply being present at this level. They are here to impose their will. The kind of scoring burst they collectively delivered is precisely what transforms a talented American squad from simply competitive into genuinely terrifying. When those two are operating at that level within the same game, defensive game plans essentially become exercises in damage control rather than genuine containment strategies. There is one observation, however, that cannot be responsibly avoided when discussing the American team's performance, and it is a conversation that has been quietly building across multiple games in this tournament. The pairing of Chelsea Gray and Caitlin Clark on the floor at the same time is simply not working. This is not a commentary on the individual talent of either player, because both are unquestionably world-class at what they do. This is purely a matter of basketball fit and operational compatibility within a shared lineup. When these two occupy the backcourt simultaneously, the offensive flow becomes congested. Ball movement loses its natural cadence. Floor spacing becomes problematic in ways that give disciplined defenses exactly the kind of predictability they need to execute their schemes. The rhythm that makes Team USA so difficult to guard in their best lineups simply evaporates when this combination is on the court together. And in a game where every possession carries actual consequences, that kind of inefficiency becomes magnified in ways that are hard to overlook. Watching it unfold in real time produces a particular kind of frustration, not at either individual player, but at the persistence of a combination that the evidence has repeatedly suggested does not function at this level of competition. Coaching staffs experiment, adjustments get made, and sometimes the data simply says this particular configuration needs to be retired. That moment appears to have arrived for this pairing. Despite that tactical observation, the broader picture remains one of a convincing American victory in a game that provided genuine entertainment value precisely because Spain refused to cooperate with the blowout narrative. Real competition requires a legitimate challenger, and Spain supplied exactly that. Team USA had to work, had to adjust, had to demonstrate resilience across difficult stretches of the game. That is infinitely more valuable as a preparation experience heading into the knockout stages than a comfortable, unchallenged demolition would have been. And for the people watching at home, the entertainment quality of a genuinely contested game dwarfs what a 50-point annihilation would have offered. Now, the conversation must turn to something that should have surprised absolutely nobody paying close attention throughout this tournament: the formal designation of Caitlin Clark as the most valuable player of the group stage. If you had tracked the games with any degree of analytical attention, this announcement likely arrived not as a revelation, but as a confirmation of what the evidence had been building toward since the very first game. The statistical case for Clark's MVP recognition is not merely strong, it is essentially airtight when examined across the full scope of the tournament. She led Team USA in total scoring production across the group stage. She led the team in assists per game. Her comprehensive efficiency metrics, true shooting percentage factored alongside usage rate, assist-to-turnover ratios, and overall impact measurements placed her at the absolute peak of the American roster's contributors. The plus-minus numbers across the majority of her minutes told a similarly unambiguous story. When you compile all of that evidence spanning 5 complete games, constructing a legitimate counterargument supporting any other candidate becomes an exercise in motivated reasoning rather than honest statistical analysis. Some observers will naturally raise Paige Bueckers as an alternative candidate, and that conversation is worth engaging with seriously rather than dismissing. Bueckers did deliver several genuinely strong individual performances during the group stage. There were games where her presence dictated the tempo in meaningful ways, and where her contributions went beyond what the box score captured. However, when you examine the comprehensive statistical categories that MVP evaluations legitimately hinge upon, Bueckers did not crack the top 3 in scoring production across the tournament. She also did not rank in the top 3 in assists distribution. Her performances were quality, her effort was consistent, but the complete body of work across all 5 games simply did not match the totality of what Clark accumulated. That is not a criticism of Bueckers, it is simply an honest assessment of a comparison between 2 genuinely talented players. Kahleah Copper presents a different kind of counterargument. When Copper is operating at her absolute ceiling, the offensive weaponry she displays is among the most dynamic available at this level of international competition. She has the ability to score from multiple areas, create her own shot against quality defenders, and shift the momentum of a game through individual brilliance. The challenge with constructing an MVP case around her contributions, however, is the inconsistency that appeared across the tournament stretch. Alongside the genuinely spectacular performances existed several subdued outings, where her impact was significantly muted. MVP recognition at a tournament level demands sustained excellence across the complete run, not a collection of peaks and valleys. That fluctuation ultimately made it nearly impossible to build a credible argument placing her above Clark when the full tournament picture was considered honestly. The case for Clark, therefore, was not merely the strongest available. It was essentially predetermined by the weight of accumulated evidence. When you merge raw scoring volume, creative playmaking and assist generation, comprehensive offensive efficiency, and overall team impact across 5 consecutive games, no other candidate produced a comparably complete resume. And the team results provided important context as well. Team USA was not simply winning during this group stage. They were dismantling opponents with the kind of regularity and margin that shifts the evaluative emphasis heavily toward offensive production and creation. Winning differentials hovering around 40 points on multiple occasions signals a dominant unit, and within that dominant unit, Clark was functioning as the primary engine driving that level of performance. Her scoring created spacing, her playmaking created open looks, her court vision created advantages that her teammates converted into the kind of margins that made these results so emphatic. One dimension of Clark's influence that traditional box score statistics consistently fail to capture fully involves the gravity she creates simply by existing on the floor as a credible long-range scoring threat. Every single time she crosses half-court with the basketball, opposing defensive coordinators face a genuinely difficult set of decisions. Do they apply immediate pressure and risk her turning the corner into the paint? Do they send a second defender to trap and risk leaving her teammates in advantageous positions? Do they retreat and concede the mid-range and three-point attempts she is more than capable of converting from distances that most players would not even consider within their range? There is no comfortable answer to any of those questions. Every defensive approach carries meaningful risk. And that kind of gravity, that defensive attention that must be paid regardless of whether she ultimately takes or makes the shot, creates offensive opportunities for every other player sharing the floor with her. Kelsey Plum finding open windows during the tournament was not entirely coincidental. When Clark is orchestrating the offense, the floor geometry changes in ways that create advantages the statistics only partially reflect. Another layer of this MVP conversation that deserves attention involves the broader context surrounding Clark's return to competitive basketball at this level. By any reasonable calculation, she had been away from high-intensity organized competition for approximately 8 months before this tournament began. That is not a brief rest period or a minor gap. That is a substantial absence, particularly for a player whose effectiveness depends so heavily on rhythm, timing, and the kind of feel for game flow that only develops through consistent competitive repetition. Returning from that length of absence and immediately performing at a level sufficient to win a tournament MVP across 5 games against quality international opposition, that is not ordinary. That is the kind of return that demonstrates something meaningful about both her physical preparation and her competitive mentality. Multiple observers throughout the tournament also noted that Clark appeared physically sharper and more fluid than she had in previous competitive appearances. There was a visible trimness to her movement, a quickness in her first steps, a comfort and confidence in her body that translated directly into the way she attacked defensive schemes. She appeared lighter on her feet, more explosive in transition, and more decisive in her decision-making. All of those elements combined to produce a player who is not simply returning to her previous form, but potentially operating at a level above where she had been before the extended absence. That trajectory, moving in that direction at this moment in the competitive calendar, carries enormous implications for what comes next in the tournament. Because beyond the MVP recognition and the group stage statistics, what this tournament stretch has demonstrated is that Clark occupies a unique position in the current landscape of the sport. She is not simply an efficient player who accumulates favorable numbers within a structured system. She is an event. She is the reason casual observers convert into dedicated watchers. She is the player around whom entire game-watching experiences are constructed, where fans tune in not merely to check a result, but specifically to witness what she might produce on any given possession. The logo three-pointers from distances that defensive scouting reports practically cannot account for. The no-look passes that redirect the attention of an entire arena to a teammate who suddenly has a clear path. The singular possessions that transform from routine offensive sequences into something genuinely remarkable in the span of 2 dribbles. Every game during this group stage contained at least one of those sequences, moments that compelled viewers to rewind, to pause, to share with people who missed it live. That quality of entertainment and engagement is extraordinarily rare in sport at any level. It is important, in the interest of honest and balanced analysis, to acknowledge that none of the above automatically places Clark at the uncontested summit of women's basketball globally. The conversation around A'ja Wilson as the supreme individual talent in the sport currently carries substantial weight, and the arguments supporting that position are serious and deserving of respect. The greatest player and the most compelling player do not always occupy the same body, and that distinction matters when evaluating individual contributions honestly. But within the specific population of guards, and specifically within the framework of entertainment value combined with competitive influence, Clark's position at the absolute top of that conversation is essentially unassailable. She is a player who can change the entire character of a game through a single possession, and that capacity is extraordinarily difficult to quantify but impossible to ignore. The MVP recognition, then, represents something beyond the statistical summary that supported it. It reflects the totality of how she shaped this tournament, not just the numbers on a spreadsheet,